any therapist I had spoke to, it never helped me out. I heard you on the podcast, and that was the first time I kind of resonated and went, okay, this guy is actually like speaking my language. I feel like myself. Like I feel like me. My husband would say to me, "You're so calm."
So talk to me, sister. It's been a while since we had our first chat, and I still remember your first call at the Intimacy Accelerator and how you're like very open with how much I piss you off, but then you slowly over time, it's so weird. Like, could you describe it to me? Because I really want to know from your perspective what that was like. Obviously, you signed up for a reason, but you were very triggered by some of the things that I was saying. And if you could go back and see yourself back then, can you understand what it was that was so confronting for you when we began?
I think because a lot of the other therapy that I had done in the past never really like got to the root of anything. It was always like, well, how are you feeling? Give it a name.
So once you started, do you think that that's what it was? That's what the whole challenge was, because you were getting all of those emotions coming up and you didn't know what to do with them. So you were like, damn you, Nima. Was that it? What was it that was so confronting, do you think?
It was the first time that somebody actually like said it like it was. Yeah. And they didn't like powder puff around it. Like, like trying to spare me from feeling like a piece of shit. Or that it was okay to feel that way, right? Because again, like I talked to people and it was always like, trying to, that whole sensation, like your best friend is sitting beside you, rubbing your back and saying, it sucks that you feel that way and see you next week. Where this was more of a, okay, so why you feel that way? And feeling comfortable enough to really kind of like speak my truth about things. Like I have never really spoken before about like the abuse. It was more, I'm anxious. And I left it at that.
So what was going on in your life before and around the time you jumped in and started doing the work with us?
About 5 years ago, longer than that actually, but it all came to a head about 5 years ago. There was a friend of mine, and I've mentioned this, her name is Jen. She was our friend, and she like relentlessly pursued my husband, and my husband not in a good place. And they ended up having an emotional affair, and she was very pursuant of him. I caught that this was happening, and that was kind of the end of it, only to find out that he was still keeping in contact with her and vice versa. And she was showing up to his spin classes. And these are things that I kind of came across. And of course I take on the blame, and I'm not being good enough. And if I was good enough, he wouldn't be speaking to this other woman still. And any therapist I had spoke to, it never helped me out. So that's where I heard you on the podcast. And that was the first time I kind of resonated and went, okay, this guy is actually like speaking my language.
There was an emotional affair that was happening. You didn't know what to do with those emotions. You took on the blame. Your husband didn't know how to act in a way that created safety. He was in his own stuff and trying to work through whatever. And you're sitting here trying to figure out really what you want is to have a relationship where you feel connected. Mm-hmm. Or if it's not possible, to have the courage to kind of like move on. And that's kind of where you were when you began, wasn't it?
Yes.
After experiencing that, trying all these therapies, how would you describe your state in about 3 or 4 different words?
Yeah, frustrated, lost. Like I'd given up on myself.
So what made you decide to start working with us, with me? Why me over someone else? What was it about me specifically?
I watched like a couple of your YouTube things, and part of it was desperation. Like, well,
It's like, I've given up. This is my last hope.
That's right. Exactly.
That's awesome.
It was just kind of, honestly, it was just like, well, why not?
Cool. Okay. So what happened during the time we were working together as far as a breakthrough or epiphany?
I think my biggest struggle was I wanted to not feel like that anymore. And struggling with but yeah, I've done all this so-called other work and I still feel it. It was that illusion, that fantasy that I'm not going to feel bad about stuff ever again. And I'm going to be completely over all these emotions.
The negative emotions. Yeah.
Right. And so some of it was that, again, why I'm like, I hate you so much because this is not the answer that I wanted.
Right. You were looking for the fantasy, and I try to awaken people out of the fantasy into reality. And it's not what people want, is it?
No, because the fantasy was so nice because the reality that you paint is like a nightmare, but that's the reality of it. That is our life. And that was a good lesson though, too. It's like, we're always searching for the fantasy because there's some weird comfort in it, but that's also so painful because it's just, you're lying to yourself day after day. And so once I started to go, okay, like this is my reality. I'm not going to never feel bad again. Like, so I just have to come to terms with how do I manage that now?
So what happened after that, and what's been going on in your life ever since you kind of melted away the fantasies? And what do you notice has happened with yourself, the relationship, your vision, your level of anxiety, all of that stuff? What have you noticed? How do you feel now?
Well, it's funny. I feel like myself. Like I feel like me, like who I really am deep down, and I feel nobody has ever seen, and I've spent so long trying to prove nothing. That's what's so funny. I haven't had to prove anything, and like, and then to see where around me that I've always been seen by people, but I've never allowed that to happen.
Wow. That's a win.
So totally. And that's the thing, like it's funny for the first little bit, like if all of it was just like, the pennies dropping and things clicking, and then my husband would say to me, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, why?" He's like, "I don't know. Like I don't know." I'm like, "Okay." And he kept asking me, like it actually pissed me off. It triggered me. And I said, "Why do you keep asking what's wrong with me?" So there's nothing wrong with me. He goes, "Yeah, but you're so calm." But he, without me doing anything, as far as preaching anything, but just focusing on me, he started to go, "Yeah, like you're so calm." He's like, "And I really like it." And I'm like, "Good, so do I." But
Amazing.
I look back now and I think I've always been that person. There's a part of me now that gets angry to think that I was not seen that way. I'm like, but I've always been that way. But somebody else has made me think that I'm not. I'm like, no.
What would you say to anybody who's kind of watching or listening in, who's considering working with us, and who would benefit the most from this work?
Well, truly anybody would benefit from this work, but the people that are searching, like you don't have to search anymore. It's like you're like a lighthouse. It's like you're the beacon. You just have to follow that and stay on course. I think anybody who is still looking for the answer, they're not going to find it here. You have to be open to the answer coming to you. So if I was still on that path searching for an answer, then I'm going to question everything that you are saying, because I'm looking for something like meaning within that versus just taking it in and letting it land. Because there's many times that you would say stuff and I'd be like, huh. And like the next day, all of a sudden I'd go, oh, like that's, versus, and I would catch myself at the beginning, like, what did he mean by that? And I'd go back and look at my notes and I'd try to, again, think it out. And I found when I just let myself be open and kind of just surrender to whatever message was going to come to me, that's when stuff started to literally go, oh, like I would have moments I would gasp when I was walking the dog. I'm like, oh, I get it. Like oh my goodness.
Yeah. So I'm so glad that you did. I love it when someone's as into this stuff as I am. I really appreciate your participation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.